I take a holistic approach when I'm looking at a deal. So I'm getting things like the T12, right, which is the trailing 12 months of profit and loss statements, and taking a look at exactly what's going on with that property. How are they operating it? And how can we do things more efficiently?
If you're a real estate agent earning $200,000 a year and you want to grow your passive income, this show is for you. Learn secrets other agents use and hear from experts in our field who will guide you on your journey to investing in assets like apartment communities so you can take your commissions and turn them into cash flow. Here's your host, Randal. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome back. Today's guest is Matt Picheny. The guy has been doing a lot of multifamily deals over the last few years. And today I thought it'd be great to go through, since he does some coaching, to go through and actually walk through a mini course of what it takes to become a syndicator and go out and buy these large multifamily deals. He's got over 4,500 units that he has been a general partner on, and I think double that, something like that, on when you take into account his limited partner investing as well. So wealth of knowledge. He's been involved in a lot of deals, a lot of transactions. Their latest one that we were briefly touched on, we don't actually talk about deal flow and deals that much on this call. It's a new construction deal they're doing in Ottawa, Canada, the Westboro Tower, 134 unit new construction deal. So again, he's bought legacy assets, meaning they've been built and now they're building a new one. And so he's got a ton of information, been in the game, and I highly recommend listening through this if you are looking to learn about syndication, how to get into syndication and launch your own so that you can go out and buy some of these bigger deals. His method, it's the P5 Syndication Method. So we talk about that. That is really the crux of what it is. He's also a best-selling author, writes a book about syndicating and getting into the game. It's Backstage Guide to Syndication. So again, let's jump into the show and talk to Matt. If you're getting value out of the show, please go on, rate and review. Helps us a ton. Bring on great guests just like Matt, and they can share their story and share their knowledge with you so that you can grow and get into this business and turn your commissions into cash flow. Let's go. Here we go. Matt, it's awesome to have you on the show. I really appreciate you jumping on today. I'm looking forward to the conversation and talking not just about your experience and what you know as far as deals that you've done and worked on. I know we'll touch on that just briefly, but really how a real estate professional can get into the syndication game. And I know that you're deep into that and teaching people how to do it and how to learn it. So I really want to go through and kind of do like a mini course today and just have you explain to us, here's what you do, 1, 2, 3, and go type of thing. So again, welcome to the show. It's good to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And I like your sign in the background there.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's always good to see that. I saw it in some of the other shows. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So again, I know from listening, I don't know what your unit count is now, but there are a number of podcasts. And if you guys are looking for some history and some backstory into Matt, jump onto his website. The link is going to be in the show notes down below. And you've had a ton of podcasts that you talk about, buying deals, deal specifics, and that sort of thing. So I kind of want to avoid that today. But in general, just where are you at on unit count? What markets are you guys playing in right now? And we'll just cover that just to give a little bit of backstory there.
Yeah. So, I've been a general partner in a little over 4,500 units.
Okay.
I also invest passively in deals too. So I have over 7,000 units that I've invested in passively as an LP. As a general partner, it's a little over 4,500 units, about a little over $650 million worth of real estate that I have fractional ownership of, and that I'm, in charge of operating.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. That gives a good base knowledge again. So you know what you're talking about. You've been in the business, you're doing some deals. So again, if I'm a real estate professional, real estate agent, and I'm making some commissions, and I want to get into the syndication game, not just from a passive or limited partners perspective, like what are some of the things, and I know you talk about this, so let's cover high level your course and how you would go about teaching somebody to get into the game.
Yeah, Randall, I started teaching because people were coming to me and asking me, hey, how do I do it, right? How do I get into the game? And I started informally just having some people, at first I was like, no. And then eventually someone who I had become very friendly with was like, no, like seriously, I really want to do this. And I was like, all right, fine. So, and then what I found, which I didn't think I was going to, was that actually I loved doing it. I loved helping people. I really enjoyed teaching. I have 2 young kids. I always get a kick out of when I teach them something new, they learn something that I teach them. I'm very musically inclined, so I teach them music and how to play songs and stuff. And whenever they do. I just get a huge kick out of it. And I get a huge kick out of when I work with people and see them actually succeeding. And, I really want to help more people. So with the portfolio that we discussed earlier, I've basically become sort of work optional, if you will, right? I don't have to work, but I enjoy doing stuff. And what else am I going to do? Sit around and eat Doritos and watch TV. So, but I'd like to see more people. I mean, I like to eat Doritos and watch TV, but it's just like all the time, it would kind of get boring and I'd get really fat. So I want to help other people be able to become work optional. And I think, I wrote a best-selling book called Backstage Guide to Real Estate. And the subtitle for that book is something that's important to me, which is, it says, produce passive income, write your own story, and direct your dollars towards positive change. And besides the fact that it's a neat play on words, nodding to my acting background, it's also, I think, really important. It's something that I want to do. I want to help people be able to write their own story and do things that are positive in the world. And I think that most people, if they become work optional and have time on their hands, tend to do things that are good for society, good for communities. So that's kind of where that came from. And what happened was I just started teaching people how to do what I did, like the things that I learned along my path. And I've now put it into sort of a system. It's really like a framework that I call the P5 Syndication Method. And so everybody that I work with, which I think is a bit unique, is I do one-on-one coaching with people. So I take students on. I don't have some coach that I pass them off to. It's like, it's me, it's my group. I do one-on-one coaching with people. And there's also there's a lot of facets to it. But basically, we follow a framework. And depending on where the student is and what they need to focus on, we can focus on all of them equally. We can focus on different ones differently. So I'll walk you through them and explain kind of what they are. And then I think, Randal, what might be good as I talk about each one, if you have questions about them, we could discuss.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So the first pillar, I call the real estate business assessment, right? In order to get to where you're going, you need a roadmap. And that's what we do. In the business assessment, we take a look at where someone is, where they want to go, figure out the gap in between, and come up with a detailed plan on how to get there. Maybe they have zero income coming from real estate, or let's say passive or syndication real estate income, right? Not from commissions. And then let's say they want to get to 100. How do we get them to 100 or 200 or $300,000 on an annual basis? We also, at that point, so we'll take a look at what they already have, where they're going, come up with goals. I do SMART goals, which is an acronym. It's a goal setting method, and make sure that they're very, very specific goals. And then we talk about how we're going to achieve them. And then we also make sure that we just have our housekeeping in order, right? So do you have an entity? If not, teach you how to create an entity, refer you to an attorney who's an expert in that, and make sure that that entity is set up for strong asset protection and also for tax efficiency. And we also make sure you have logo, business cards, a one-page website, so that when you're starting the business, you're meeting with investors or you're meeting with brokers or whomever, you're making sure you have a nice professional presence, right? So that, you only get one chance to make a first impression.
That's right. Yeah. So let me ask then, is the business setup, is that part of the second P, or is that the first?
It's the first pillar. This is all the real estate business assessment. Yeah. That's all part of that first one.
Okay. And then when you're going through that process, are you having the conversation with a student about the different aspects and areas they could be involved in a syndication business? Or is the approach, because if you're raising capital, you may not necessarily need an LLC if you're going to be a co-GP on a deal. I don't know maybe you can answer that for me. How do you recommend that be established if you are coming in and you're John Doe and you want to just raise, $1 million for somebody's deal and be part of the GP team? Do you need to go out and set up an LLC and get all of that established?
I would recommend that you speak with an SEC attorney, because you're not supposed to just raise capital for deals. That's the first thing. And secondly, you should talk to an attorney about how to set it up. I'm very careful to make sure that I share with people what I've done, but I don't give legal advice, because I can get myself in trouble because I'm not an attorney. But yeah, we talk through the different roles that somebody can have within a syndication. And also, this is a little bit more pillar number 2, actually, what the rules and the guidelines and things like that are. And that's really part of the second pillar. So it's a good segue into pillar number 2, which I call Backstage Guide to Syndications. And in Backstage Guides to Syndications, that's when we get into the structure, right? A lot of people, especially when they're first getting involved in syndications, how do I structure a deal? And we go over how you can structure a deal so that it's legal, ethical, and profitable. So we'll go through the ins and outs of the legal structures in terms of 506B and Regulation D under the SEC code so that you can understand how that is set up. We also will talk about the different metrics that you need to look for in a deal, the different types of strategic approaches you could take towards a deal. We talk about the different terms that you need to know. My first few conversations with brokers when I first got in the business, I was under quite a bit of duress because they would throw out these terms that I was like, I don't know what that term means. So the idea is to get people acquainted with the lingo and the language so that when they are having a conversation with a broker or an investor, they can understand what they're talking about. We also go over financing, right? And how financing works and the different types of financing products that are available, because there's a huge difference between financing that's available for 1 to 4 unit property and what the requirements are to get those loans versus a large multifamily. I'm actually going through something right now looking at a possible new personal residence, and they're looking at my DTI, and I'm like, I buy a $100 million property. They're not looking at my DTI. They're looking at how that property is going to perform. And obviously I need to have good credit and a good track record and all of those things, but it's just very different. So we talk about that. And we also, we delve into taxes, because one of the best things about real estate are the tax advantages that you can have as a passive investor and also as an active investor. And we talk about things like depreciation, bonus depreciation, accelerated depreciation, depreciation recapture. So we cover all of that, because as a sponsor or general partner on a deal, you need to be able to communicate with your investors about exactly how all of that works. So that's really sort of those broad brushstrokes, and give people an understanding of the SEC rules with the caveat again. And I always caveat it with like, hey, you need to talk with an SEC attorney. Okay, but here's my understanding of how this works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you. So you mentioned about those early conversations and how you go through and you're talking about the lingo. And I mean that in general in business, if you're trying something new, you should go learn the lingo. It's obviously helpful to know what's happening. But I'm curious, when you're having those early conversations, when you first started getting into this world, right? And you're having conversations with commercial brokers talking about buying these larger assets, how were you received? And if you didn't have that lingo, how did you overcome that type of, I guess, divide between what could be perceived as an experienced operator to a newbie coming into the world? Hey everybody, Randal Declared here with a special shout out to our friends over at Envone. If you're looking to diversify your investment portfolio, you've got to go check them out. It's envone.com. It's a crowdfunding platform with a wide range of investment opportunities, things like real estate investing and even bourbon barrel investing. So check them out. Envone hosts our crowdfund. It's actually a single-family real estate investment fund that we have launched with them, and we've had an awesome experience working with Levy and his team. They're super responsive, very quick to assist us with things that we need, and they have crowdfunding down to a science. Go ahead and check out episode 154, where Levy and I discuss crowdfunding in detail and how it can help you either invest or raise capital. And check this out. As a friend of the pod, launch your crowdfund with Envone, and you're going to get an exclusive 10% discount when you head over to envone.com/ABC, or simply call Levy and his team at 475-800-8716 and mention Agents Building Cashflow. Go crush it. Happy investing. Talk to you later.
I never tried to, fake it till you make it kind of thing. And that was never really me. As a matter of fact, and no disrespect to people who've done this before, but like there was a bunch of people who were starting around the same time as me who started these podcasts. And I was like, why are you starting a pod? Like you're at the same level that I am. And, it just felt sort of like not genuine to me. Now, by the time I wrote my book, I had done a bunch of deals and I felt like I actually had something to share with people. The first conversations that I had with brokers, I think were probably pretty atrocious. We'd have to talk with those brokers and see what they thought of me. But I got better over time. And I never lied. I was always very transparent with people about where I was, but I also would try to position myself in the best light. So I would tell them I had a few LP investments before I eventually became a GP. So, I would meet with a broker and they would be like, okay, so have you done any deals? And I would say, yeah, I'm a limited partner in 1,000 units, So it was showing like some, work towards, but if they were a savvy broker, they would know that a limited partner and a general partner are different things. But I think it sure was a lot better than saying, well, no, I have nothing at
Yeah.
all. But they would throw things at me and I would try to kind of like, fake my way through. I have a free guide. Okay. It's the 33 real estate terms. It's on my website and it's also like on my Instagram. And so it's a free guide. If you download it, the first page tells a true story about me meeting with a broker. And we went to, it was a restaurant and he ordered ramen. Okay. And so I was like, I'd never been to this restaurant before and it sounded good. So I ordered the ramen too. Did not realize it was going to be like fire ramen, like the spiciest. And I'm okay. I can do, like a jalapeno and guacamole, but I'm not like, the habanero kind of guy.
Yeah.
Obviously, this guy was, because this stuff was like literally crazy. And so I tell a little story in the beginning on the first page of the guide about how I was sweating bullets. And it partially was because of the ramen, but it partially was because this guy was just grilling me with questions about cap rates and like all kinds of stuff that I didn't really have my head fully wrapped around. And, I think I made it through that conversation okay, but it sure was a lot better once I learned those terms. And so then I give 33 terms that people should know so that they don't choke on the spicy ramen.
Yeah.
That was the moral of the story, was never say I'm having what he's having.
Oh yeah. Not unless you've been there and you know what what it is. So I guess when I wrote it down, when I wrote the question out, is how were you received, I guess and so the difference is when you're telling them, look, you're asking me about cap rates. I'm just trying to buy a property where you're not because again, I hear a lot of people say I have like 6,000 units and then they're like a 0.001% owner of those or something along those lines. And so it's not a true representation of what they actually own. And so again, coming into those conversations with a broker,
I don't know how I was received, because I think we would need to ask the brokers that, but I think I was honest with them. I would try to answer questions if they answered questions. But yeah, if they got to something that stumped me, I would be honest. And I wouldn't try to like make up an answer. I would just say, you know what? I'm really not sure about that.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm driving at is, did it turn into you found a broker or a group of brokers or one or two, whoever it was, that kind of took you under the wing and said, look, let's get you a deal. Let's find you a deal. Or was it still you just pound the pavement, keep talking to people until you got better without having some other broker come and help you through that process? That's kind of what I'm driving at, if that makes sense.
I didn't have any broker help me through the process necessarily. I'll tell you really a very Cliff Notes version, which is the spicy ramen story was in Orlando. I had been looking at deals in Ohio originally, then in Orlando, and then in Kansas City. And that's where I got my first deal, was in Kansas City.
Okay.
And a property manager who I had met with, I had gone out there, made a market visit, and was working with and looking at deals with when I got to a point when I was ready to make an offer. And she actually told me that one of her clients was looking to sell a property and offered to introduce me to that broker, who was a very, very, very little known broker who doesn't do barely any volume whatsoever. And then that's a whole other story, that first deal, but that I wrangled that thing down myself. The second deal that I got, so after I got that first deal in a nearby market, so I was that deal was technically in Lawrence, Kansas, which is about 30, 45 minutes from Kansas City. But most of the brokers who were dealing in Lawrence are Kansas City-based brokers. That's where I really wanted to be, was Kansas City. After I closed on a $10 million, my first deal was that one, was $10 million. After I closed on a $10 million deal, I think the brokers in Kansas City were like, okay, well, this Matt guy seems legit. I had met with most of them and like, all right, he closed on a $10 million deal. He can close. And there was one particular broker there who was doing a large volume of transactions at that point in time. I had bid on a number of those deals. I had made it into best and final in a number of those deals. And I got a call out of the blue one day from him because he had one of the properties I had bid on and that I was in best and final on had fallen out of contract. And that's another whole long story, but basically because of my relationship that I had built with this guy over time, and I had closed another deal, and these other people who were bidding on the deal, maybe I was a little more experienced than them. I was able to get that deal across the finish line, and I put in some aggressive terms, and there's a lot more to it. But I mean, did that broker help me? Maybe kind of a little bit, steered me in the right day, but I never had a broker sort of take me under their wings and kind of give me
like, hey, let's get you a deal type thing early on, because that doesn't. Once you're in it, it doesn't. You don't necessarily need that. I just wasn't sure on that part of your story if you're going through those conversations, kind of bumbling through the first few, and then you're getting better on your own, and then finally you're like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. We're at the point I've underwritten enough deals.
Well, by the time I got to Kansas City, so I'm sure I made a complete fool of myself in Ohio with the few brokers and property managers that I met with. I'm 100% certain that I did. I was living in Miami at the time. Once I started meeting with the brokers in Orlando, I think I was kind of okay-ish. That ramen story was in Orlando at the earlier parts of me meeting with the brokers. And then by the time I was looking at deals in Kansas City, I had a lot of confidence because I had underwritten a bunch of deals. I had met with a bunch of brokers. So I had, I felt comfortable in my own shoes at that point.
All right, we're on number 2. And are we at the point now we're in the P5, are you teaching people to talk to brokers at this point? Because I have another question about brokers, because if you have tips, again, early on, if you're out there, what are some of the tips that you have for talking to brokers?
Yeah. So, well, in pillar number 2, we're just talking about the structure.
That's right.
And how things are going to be structured.
Yeah.
So when we start talking about brokers, that's in the next pillar, right? Which is pillar 3. Well, so pillar number 3 is market mastery. Okay. How do you become a master of your chosen market? I just made a video, but it will be on YouTube in a few weeks. We're editing it right now, but it's the top 10 mistakes that I see people making, the top 10 biggest mistakes that I see people who want to get into multifamily syndication as a sponsor, like the mistakes that they make. And the first one, number 1, is looking for deals in too many markets. I see people who are going in. I know that sounds funny because I just mentioned a bunch of markets, but I was focused on Ohio. Then I was focused on Florida. Then I got focused on Kansas City. And this was over a period of just about 2 years.
Yeah.
But I want all my students to focus on one market. I see people out there, they're looking at deals in 10 different markets and they're like, I can't find any deals that make sense. And I'm like, yeah, of course not, because you just have very rudimentary knowledge of a market. You don't know how that market works. You don't know where the path of progress is, the good part of town, the bad part of town. So there's no way for you to gain any sort of competitive advantage. I can underwrite the deal as well as you can, and I don't even know the market.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So market mastery is really important. There's a Shakespeare quote that I love, which is jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah. Right? So we work with people making sure they focus on one market only. Now, if it happens the way that I did, that market's not working out for you for one reason or another, you switch to another market. Eventually, if you're successful in one market, you can expand. But focus on one market and then, really understanding that market, the sub-markets. We talk about the different metrics that you want to look for in a market. And then we talk about what you were just going to ask, Randal, what you just asked about, which was about meeting what I call all the key players in a market, which is the brokers, the property managers, and the other property owners. I'm, GP, and I've been a GP in over 4,500 units at this point. And I have never gotten a deal by finding a property online or being on a broker's email list and putting in the best and highest offer. I've never gotten a deal that way. I mean, I just told you the first 2 stories, being introduced by a property manager or, by a deal falling out of contract, right? There's always been some unique circumstance that has allowed me to get what I consider very good deals and able to give good returns to our investors. So developing those relationships with those people is paramount. I mean, we've gotten off-market deals by having relationships with property owners, So we get access to deals before they go out to the general public, or not even the general public, to a broker's buying list because we have a relationship with that broker. We are able to do that through cultivating those relationships. And so that's all in what I consider market mastery.
Okay. So that's the third. And let's dive into this just a little bit because the top 10, this will come out, I'm sure, after you post that. So we're going to link to that in the show notes once we have a copy of your link to get to the top 10 mistakes, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure. Just check out my YouTube channel. But yeah.
Okay. So then when you're going through one, I would say, how do you pick a market? what is your recommendation when you're going through to pick a market? And again, this is kind of high level, right? Let's keep it high level. Are you talking to a student and you say, okay, you're in San Antonio or Randall, you should just stay in San Antonio? Like, pick that market. Or do you go through and you say, I like the beach, let's go find a beach? Like, what is it that you go through to find the market?
Well, I don't want to give away my secret sauce, Randall.
I mean, this is the high level, super high level to get
Yeah.
them in the door.
No, I think if you live in a market where you can go ahead and, find something great in your backyard, so to speak, you should do it.
Yeah.
Right? You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I cannot find any deals around here that pencil out. If anyone's listening to this podcast and has a deal in the New York City area that pencils out, you're looking for a partner, give me a call. But I can't. And I would love to not have to get on an airplane to go visit my properties. But that's just not the facts of what is going on here, because I'm looking for properties that have good cash flow. So there's going to inherently be certain markets that just won't work. New York City being one of them. Most of the Northeast, although there are pockets of the Northeast that do work. Most of the West Coast, like California, for example, Washington, Oregon, tend to not work. It doesn't mean that there's not anomalies. It doesn't mean you can't find deals there. But for the type of things that I look for, which are cash flowing properties where we can add value, I'm just not finding deals in some areas. So that's part of looking at sort of the metrics, understanding the deals, understanding what's going on in that market, understanding the amount of risk that's happening in that market. Those are all different factors that we look at. But there are other sort of, I would call, soft factors that someone can look at. And those are things like, okay, so if you have to go out of your own backyard, how are you going to get to where you're going? And like, if you have to take a plane, are there direct flights? And how many direct flights are there every day and across how many different carriers? Because if, I don't know, I'm going to pick on Delta. I love Delta, but I'm going to pick on Delta. If Delta, for some reason, their system goes down and you need to get to your property, like, are you going to be able to get another carrier to take you out there? So you want to find a place that is going to be somewhere that you can travel to, with the least amount of friction. Then you're also going to want to find a place where, like, you want to go. Like,
That's why I'm asking. I mean, it's
going to Kansas City. I have deals in Kansas City. I love Kansas City. I've met so many people in Kansas City. I love the people there. And I love the barbecue there, by the way. I think it's the best barbecue around. But, I'm sure some people would disagree with that. But like, it's, you want to go somewhere where you're gonna actually want to be, because you're gonna be visiting that property. So those are some of the soft factors that you're gonna think about. When I started doing this, let's talk about the places that I was looking at, right? I told you I was looking in Ohio. I was looking in the Akron area. Why? Well, my cousin lives there, okay? And my aunt and uncle live there. And I have some other cousins that are there. So I had family there and I knew the area and I felt comfortable, and I had done some real estate deals there too. And so that was comfortable for me. I was living in Miami at the time, but I was not comfortable with the risk in Miami. In hindsight now, heck, I should have bought tons of property then, but the numbers just didn't make. I was like, wow, this is really speculative. I think it was speculative. It turned out the speculators probably have done very, very well for themselves, but I wasn't comfortable with that level of risk. But I did like Florida as a whole. And I was looking, between Tampa and basically like Daytona, Central Florida, which is where I grew up and where my mom still lives there. It's where my parents were living at the time. And I knew it extremely well, having grown up there and going back to visit. So, very often. So then I chose Kansas City. And that's a really funny story. When I used to be an actor, I actually got cast to do a summer of shows in Kansas City. And I was like in my 20s and not really, a bit naive about the cultural geography of the Midwest. And I assumed I was going to be like, sitting around in a cornfield, talking to, because I did summer stock in Indiana before. And that's kind of like what it was like. So so I get to Kansas City and I was like, wow, like there's an old show tune. Everything's up to date in Kansas City. And that's true. Like, it was a really great metropolitan town. It was awesome. Had a great nightlife. I had like one of the best summers of my life there. So I've had like a soft spot in my heart for Kansas City ever since I had misjudged it so poorly. And one of my best friends, my college roommate, guy was like in my wedding. I'm still very, very close with him. He had moved to Kansas City at the time with his family. So it was like, all right, I could go to this city that I love and, hang out with my buddy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I had started looking at some deals there, and they seemed to be penciling out, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I chose that. So you can see all the markets that I chose were based on something other than the market being strong, and they are good markets too. They had the right fundamentals, but you could find a good deal in almost any market. I mean, there are people doing deals in New York City.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the strategy and what you're working toward. But again, I just want to touch on briefly. There's a ton of rationale to go into microeconomics and dig deep and spend all this time looking at the tea leaves and what's going to happen. And yet you just kind of went through a process that is very similar to what the way I would look at something. I look at Temple because my sister lives up there, and so I can go look at those assets up in Temple, right? And that's in Texas. But I just want to get that out because you don't have to do a ton of analysis on the area,
I agree. One of my first students was a guy who was a data analyst for a tech company. He lived out on the West Coast, and like he was like a spreadsheet. I hope he doesn't take this the wrong way. He's a nerd, kind of a nerd.
Yeah.
This guy was kind of like a nerd, right? He just was really into data.
Yeah.
And he spent all this time and created this really complex spreadsheet, blah, 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 looking at all these data points and came up with like the 10 most competitive. I mean, like, yes, he was right. Those 10 markets were the fastest growing, had the strongest demographics. But he wasn't the only one looking at that data. First off. Secondly, I could have told him right off the bat what they were without him needing to do the crunch the numbers. But also, like, why are you going to go into those markets? Like, maybe you are, but like, those are the most competitive. Those are going to be the hardest ones to find a deal in. So do you necessarily want to go into the thing that's going to have the highest amount of competition? I mean, maybe you do, but there are other ways, like you're saying.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And that's why I thought it would be important just to kind of ask you how you go about it with your students, what you're talking about. All right. So let me ask you then, still on three, just because I think it's an interesting topic. Once you establish and you say, okay, I want to be in Kansas City, what are one or two of your like go-to tricks that help you meet the brokers and get to know them? Are you just showing up at events? Are you doing tours? What is it that you're doing? And then the same thing with the property owners. You mentioned that you meet the property owners. So that's something that I hadn't thought through, right? Just going around meeting all the property. I've met a lot of them through just, being out, looking at property, talking to brokers, and that sort of thing. But are there specific things that you teach or that you would recommend someone do? I
think it's just it all rolls into good old fashioned networking, Randall, going to different events and things like that are wonderful. One of the things I do now is like I speak at events. So I get to meet a lot of people through that. I'm going to Kansas City in October they have a cash flow summit. And I'm sure I'll meet a ton of people through that. But when you're starting off, you don't speak at things. Or maybe they do. I don't know. Yeah. But what you could do is you could start your own thing and then you can speak at that, right? You could start your own thing. You could start your own meetup, your own conference, your own whatever it is. And that can help you meet a lot of people.
Okay. All right. It's a good tip. So we're on number 3, market mastery. All right. We got our market. We know what we're going to buy. We're going out. We're meeting all the players. We talked to property management. We've done all of our things. What are we moving on to now?
Well, so we've gone out, we've met everybody, and hopefully we're getting deal flow in, right? Okay. So that's why pillar number 4 is deal analysis.
All right.
Okay. And so, look, I teach underwriting. I've got my own proprietary spreadsheet that's taken me years to develop, and I teach people like literally cell by cell, how to go through it. But it really comes down to this. There's underwriting, but that's not what the name of this pillar is. The name of this pillar is deal analysis, which I think is different. All right. I take a holistic approach when I'm looking at a deal. So I'm getting things like the T12, right, which is the trailing 12 months of profit and loss statements, and taking a look at exactly what's going on with that property. How are they operating it? And how can we do things more efficiently, right? I'm looking at the rent roll to understand truly what's going on, what's truly achievable, what's really happening. There's a lot of things kind of behind the scenes that you can figure out by looking at that T12 and rent roll. Could be extremely revealing. I also apply my market mastery, right? My knowledge, my expert knowledge of the market now. And I'll pull in third-party reports from places like CoStar or Yardi. And so I'll use all those different inputs to form my assumptions for my business plan. And then I plug that into my underwriting. And that's what allows me to come up with an offering price that's going to make the deal a home run for me and my investors.
Yeah. What are like, I don't know if you can distill it down to one, two. What are some of the biggest red flags when you're running through your deal analysis? Like, is there one from the from the T12 and you're like, oh, if I see this, there's a problem or something?
No, I don't. I'm trying to think right now because no one's ever asked me that question before. But there's not really anything that I can look at really quick on a T12 and be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to run for the hills. I always get to a point on every single deal where I can make an offer, always on every deal. Now, that offer might be very, very, might be half of the price of what the broker's looking for. But that's kind of what I do is I'm like, all right, if I look at this deal and I analyze it and I put everything where it should be, then, I can figure it out. For example, a broker might be telling you that, you can get $2,000 a month for rent on the property. But from my market knowledge, that seems highly unlikely. And then I'm looking at the rent roll, and the only thing they've ever rented these units out, they have renovated units that they're renting out for 1,200, and I'm like, yeah, I'm never going to get 2,000, right? Yeah. So I don't run away from it. I just know, okay, well, I got to underwrite for like 1,200 or maybe 1,400, but I'm never going to get to 2,000, right? Based on the information that I know about the market, based on the third party data, all of that stuff, and I put it all in, I bake it all together, and then I come up with a number. And sometimes that number is right around what they're looking for. Sometimes it's off,
So when you're going through and looking at this, and we may get to this on the next one, but going through deal analysis, part of that is return profile, return metrics that you're trying to hit with for yourself and for investors that you may have coming along with you. So when you're going through, and obviously your offer price is predicated on hitting those returns, right? You're not going to offer something that's going to be not hitting your target. So if not in this bullet point, maybe in the next one, but what kind of returns are you looking for deals that you are looking to buy?
Yeah. So you're right. We have to make sure that we're going to get the returns for the investors, or we're never going to be able to do the deal because we don't have any.
Yeah.
So we have to adjust the purchase price. So there are things that we could adjust, like our fee as a sponsor. We can adjust that sometimes to help. But the best deal I ever did was a deal where we brought our fee down a little bit. It was a big deal, and I was like, all right, shave a couple of. It was like we can either fudge on like the numbers on rent growth or something like that, and be disingenuous to ourselves and our investors, and probably not be able to hit those numbers and look like idiots and not be good stewards of our investors' capital. Or another way we can hit the number that we know we need to get this deal is, what if we take a couple percentage points less on our carried interest?
Yeah,
which we did. That's the best deal I ever did. Doubled investors' money in 2 years. It was a nice one. But what I'm looking for is I want to have some sort of cash on cash component while we're holding on to the property. That can vary, and there's things that you could do, like have a preferred return, which would help, boost that up. We look to, essentially double investors' money in about 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
But ultimately what it comes down to is the IRR. As an investor myself, a passive investor in a lot of deals, the most important thing to me is the IRR, which is just I know you know this, Randall, but for anyone who's listening who doesn't know the IRR, that's the internal rate of return. So what it does is it takes into account the time value of money. So if you have a deal that doubles, you put $100,000 in a deal, and 5 years from now you get $200,000, that's great, you doubled your money, but you didn't get anything in between. You didn't get anything until you got the $200,000. That's going to have one rate of return. You're going to have one with a higher rate of return if, let's say, you got $20,000 every year for 4 years. So that's $80,000. And you got a check for 120 at the end. That's going to have a higher rate of return because you're getting more money back faster. Yeah. So we look for IRRs, even though we have deals that will do essentially 20% annualized return if you double your money in 5 years. but that IRR is different. Our IRRs are usually somewhere between 13 to 16%
Okay.
on our pro forma. And I'm very happy to say that the vast majority of cases, we do much better than that. But that's what we look for, is a 13 to 16% IRR.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was driving at. Kind of curious when you're looking at them, and is that net to investor type of
Yes,
return?
net to correct, net
Yeah.
to investor.
Yeah. So again, I want to finish the 5 Ps, but are you seeing those deals right now? Are you transacting deals right now that are hitting those numbers? And are you finding a lot in the market coming back or starting to come on to?
Look, I mean, we could have a whole other discussion about the market, where I think things are and where they're going, which is all, I think, moving in a slow but positive direction. What I will say is I'm very pragmatic in my approach. And so I have always only done about 1 to 2 deals. I had 1 year where I did 3 deals in a year. And that's because like we closed on one in early January. But I am always taking a slow approach to the market. I think there's been a chasm between where, sellers' expectations and what buyers can pay, especially with this run up in interest rates that we've had. But I'm seeing that gap tighten up. And at the time of recording this on August 1st of 2024, Jerome Powell just made statements yesterday saying that, rates are remaining steady, but he's saying that, signaling that there's probably going to be a reduction in September. I think the word on the street is 3 reductions before the end of the year. I don't know that I buy that, by the way. I think maybe 2, but maybe 3. And I think we just have to see where the data, comes in. There's also been, the Q2 report is out from RealPage, and there has been significant demand growth in specific markets that is like kind of off the charts. And so, there's a lot of inventory coming online and will be coming online for the next like 12 to 18 months, which has been hampering rent growth. However, seeing this, really, really strong demand is like, oh, okay, well, maybe we're going to normalize sooner. I don't know. And then, the prognosis for like 2026 and beyond is like rent growth really going up because all these new construction has basically halted.
Yeah.
And then when are they going to start again? And meanwhile, there's demand. And so, there's going to be a supply demand imbalance.
Yeah.
So I think the prognosis looks really good, but, everything incrementally, are interest rates going to go down? Yeah, but like they're already like really, really, really high. So even if there are 3 rate reductions, and even if they do them, a quarter of a point, you're still talking about only a 75 basis point reduction, which still, it's there's a ways to go. So we'll have to see. I think things will improve incrementally.
Are you trying to find another deal this year? Or do you already buy one? Are you targeting still one acquisition?
I'm never like, oh, I'm only going to do 1 or 2 deals. I can only do 1 deal this year. Or I must do 3. I'm never like that. I'm always looking at what's out there in the market, trying to find good opportunities. Heck, I mean, if I had a year where I had found 10 amazing opportunities in a row, maybe I would do all 10. I don't know. I've never been presented with that. But I mean, I think I haven't. So we're working on a new construction deal right now, but beyond that, I'm sure there'll be something else coming down the pike.
That's a Canadian one?
Yeah.
Very curious about that. Well, we can talk about that another time. I want to get to the 5th P, right? Okay, so we're here. We have deal analysis. We got deal flow coming in. We understand how to underwrite. We've got our financials. Now what? Now where are we?
Pillar 5 is called selling your story. Okay. And it's really about communicating with the world who you are, what you're about, and your deal, right? You're going to need capital to get your deal across the finish line, unless you're independently wealthy. And you need to be able to communicate with people on what that deal is. So, we talk about things about where to go to find investors, how to meet investors, how to keep in contact with investors, keep them engaged so that you're top of mind through things like social media, through email, so that when you do have an opportunity, they're receptive. And, I show people how I put my deals together. I have a specific formula that I use for my deals. My investor presentations, I should show people how to do that. Also go into some things like using technology. For instance, I haven't gotten it to the point where I just press a button and money magically appears in the bank account. but I have gotten it to a point where I can do things through automation that I used to have to do manually.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Like, I mean, something as simple as an onboarding sequence, right?
Yeah.
When somebody's first coming in, a new investor, and doing like an email warm-up sequence kind of thing. Or I think Russell Brunson calls it a soap opera sequence, right? Certain to do things when people are interested in deals, when I send them out to gauge their interest and keep it all organized. There's a lot of different things that can go on. And I mean, I used to have to like manually do things in spreadsheets, and I can use a CRM system to do all that stuff. And then the other thing is like, using that brand that you create to expand your network and foster new relationships so that you can build your business beyond just that first deal, right? And so that's what selling your story is really all about.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I think that is a thorough approach to learning the business, and that's fantastic. I do want to ask, like right now, raising capital then, since that's kind of the last, telling your story, going out, raising capital. You have a new student come in and they find a deal, they're looking. What are you telling them? Here's your starting from scratch. Maybe they don't have the whole back end system set up, but they have a small group of people they can go talk to. Like, what is it that you would recommend that they do in order to go start raising money right now in today's environment? You know how it's.
Yeah, I mean, I recommend a bunch of different approaches.
Okay.
And what I really think is, when we're looking at the P5 syndication method, the first 3 can get done in about the first 90 days, usually less. And then you're spending the rest of your time really in pillars 4 and 5, right?
Yeah.
Looking at deals, analyzing deals, and simultaneously building your investor database so that when you do have the right opportunity, you have investors that you can go to marry those. And, there's many different ways, but it really comes down to communicating with people, right? If you've got your own people who you think you could go to, start telling them about what you're doing, what you're thinking about. Talk to them about hypothetical deals. I onboard most of my investors when I don't have a deal. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm doing a 506B, that's also really good because you need to be compliant with a 506B, have a pre-existing substantive relationship. But it's not like I do it on purpose. It's just that's kind of what happens is like most of the people that I'm bringing in, I'm bringing them in, I'll onboard 1 or 2 investors this week and then next week, right? From like different sources. And I get a chance to talk with them about who I am and what I do, what they're interested in, what their risk tolerance is, what their experience has been, what their goals are, to really understand who they are, if they're the right fit for my type of opportunities. And then if they are, I can let them know about them when they come up and they're not under like the pressure to make a decision right then. It's like they can kind of get comfortable with the idea. So that's why I say if you're somebody and you have people that you think you could go to invest in these deals, why not talk about it conceptually now, see if they're bought in on the concept of it. So then when you do have an opportunity that you bring to them, they're already kind of understand how it works and kind of the framework and have already wrapped their head around it, instead of them trying to wrap their head around this concept for the first time when there's a deal on the line and a clock that's ticking.
Yeah. That's great advice. Matt, ton of great information. I really appreciate you going through, walking through that process. I know you have offerings that you guys have as they come up. And so if you're looking to get into multifamily investing or investing in general, I would highly recommend reaching out to Matt and his team. I'm going to leave a link for that in the show notes. If you guys want to reach out.
Yeah, and it's super easy. It's just my last name is Picheny.com, Picheny.com.
Perfect. Love it. Thanks for jumping on, sharing your knowledge, information. Catch you guys on the next episode. Did you know that 80% of the agents we speak with got into real estate in order to gain passive income so they could obtain financial freedom and become work optional? If you want to stay up to date, the best way is to make sure you're subscribed. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do it now. We'll catch you on the next episode.